All right. Hi, everyone. Can you all see and hear me okay? Very good. Well, we've made it to the end. So before we launch into our lecture for today, just give yourselves a big pat on the back, right? I know summer courses can seem, I don't know, like easy and difficult at the same time, right? I guess, I don't know, summer classes tend to be a little bit more chill because it is the summertime. But the fact that they're compressed like they are, right? I mean, we're doing 2 3 hour lectures a week. That's a lot. And some of you might have jobs or more than one class or both, right? So it can be tough. So I think you should all be happy that you hung in there, proud of yourselves, right? And so that's why today's lecture is kind of going to be a little bit of fun, a little bit more informal. You can see on Brightspace, for example, that there are no slides for today. I just have some little notes that I've jotted down on a piece of paper to remind me what I want to talk about. Of course, the main thing we're going to be doing is looking over the results of the survey for the participation elements. And the idea there is for me to show you how we actually do science. And it'll be interesting too, because I haven't really had to do any statistics since graduate school. Um, so we're going to find out how rusty I am. So, you know, bear with me. And if any of you want to jump in, if any of you have ideas of what kind of things we could do with the data, we could do that too. But I do have some things that I want to look at. Um, we're talking pre, post knowledge and belief levels primarily. So I'll say a bit more about that shortly. I've also got some other things that I'll say to sort of wrap the class up after that. Um, so I guess with that said, do you want to dive in? Do you want to get nerdy? Excellent. Yeah, we're gonna get real nerdy today. This feels almost like I'm not doing a lecture, but rather a live stream, which is interesting. I mean, I guess all online lectures feel like that to some extent, but I don't know, more so today. So, adventures in doing actual scientific research. Well, first of all, this isn't proper scientific research, right? This is just a little exercise that we've done, uh, sort of, for the class. Yeah, okay, fair, Zach. Yeah, I mean, we were nerdy before. We're getting real nerdy now, right? Like so nerdy. You guys want to do some non-parametric tests on the data I've collected? Like so nerdy. I love it. All right, so this is not like a proper study. I should preface everything by saying that it's not a proper study. The reason why is because, well, first of all, it's not really as well planned as it could be. This is just kind of like a toy study that I wanted to try in the hopes of maybe shaking off the rust and doing a proper study on this down the road. So this is not a proper study. It's like a toy example so that if you're coming from a background like, let's say you're not a psych student or you're not a cognitive science student, you might not be too familiar with this stuff. But this is how we do a lot of the research that we do. We gather data, we run statistics on it, and we try and see what that data tell us. And the data that I collected was from the survey. Do you recall the paper by Jones and Zisny that we looked very, very briefly at um, for our first proper lecture, The Philosopher's Guide to the Anonymous or Anomalous? So in that study, well, it's really more of a paper, but they talk a lot about anomalistic psychology and how it differs from parapsychology. That's primarily what we focused on. But they also did a little study um, looking into how knowledge and belief change when students are taught about so-called occult beliefs, right? I'm calling them anomalous beliefs, but they call it occult. This was the early 80s, right? So this is right around the time the Satanic Panic is kicking off. And if you look at these two authors, um, they actually have quite a lot of work on this stuff that was published in the late 70s through the 80s. They've also written a textbook on anomalistic psychology. Oh, Bell, this inspired your research. That's good. That's good. I'm glad you got some inspiration from the paper. But what they did is they recorded their students well, I'll get to that, Holly. But they recorded their students' self-reported levels of knowledge of esoteric and occult phenomena and their levels of belief in certain examples of those phenomena. And they did that before learning got underway and after learning had been completed, right? And the general picture they got was fairly interesting. Knowledge went up and belief went down. Except for one thing, which I'll get to in a moment. Um, but yeah, no real change across tests. Holly, do you mean in Jones and Zusney's paper? Do you mean there was no change in levels of belief or knowledge? While you're getting back to me, I'll oh, okay, yeah. Because what I recall is there was actually a change. Belief levels did tend to go down, but not for everything. One interesting thing which I'll show you. I have to move everything around here. One interesting thing that they noticed was that one belief that was pretty robust was belief in one's own psychic ability. Belief in if you believed that you had psychic abilities, that belief did not tend to be diminished, at least on their study, by learning more about anomalistic psychology, which I thought was interesting. And that's why I actually added that question item. I have latent psi abilities. So the questionnaire that you completed, if you did the participation elements, was the belief in the paranormal scale. It's not the exact same scale that Jones and Zusney used. It's an updated version. But when you're asking questions about belief, or when you were answering your questions about levels of belief, you were answering the paranormal belief scale. Now, because of the way Brightspace works, I kind of had to fiddle with things a bit. I think usually this is a 5 or 7 point Likert scale. For some reason, I had to do 8, which is no big deal, but just be aware that we're using different scale. And then, of course, the paranormal belief scale also has a number of elements. So there are multiple questions, but some of those questions reflect the same like items, right? So the soul continues to exist, though the body may die. And let's say your mind or soul can leave your body and travel. Those might both be related to an item. To an item that's related to, well, I would say traditional religious beliefs or spiritualism, right? So all the variety of questions are all sort of getting at these items, traditional religious beliefs, psi, witchcraft, superstition, spiritualism, extraordinary life forms, and precognition. Which I think it's kind of weird that precognition and psi are separated here, but anyway, these are the items or the dimensions of what the test is asking you about, and the specific questions are about aspects of those dimensions, right? So you would have completed the first part of the survey, which asked you to rate um, your knowledge of these items. So when it comes to traditional religious beliefs, how knowledgeable would you say you are? 1 is not very knowledgeable at all, and 8 is very knowledgeable, right? And then we can compare that to the same dimension after you've learned everything you've learned in this class. So how knowledgeable would you say you are from a scale of one, not knowledgeable at all, to eight, very knowledgeable when traditional religious beliefs? We can see here actually, participant one, their self-reported knowledge went up. Likewise for two, eight, number three stayed about the same. Number six, same. So there's some change. But what we really want to do is look at the averages. So overall, how did your knowledge of all of these dimensions change? And we're going to do the same thing with belief. So these are the scores for the pre-test, right? Before you learned everything. These are what we call the composite averages. So the average of all of these scores across the items. And this is the post stuff. Um, of course, another quirk about Brightspace, if you're ever teaching a class and you plan to do research using Brightspace, after this, my advice would be don't. Use something else. Because Brightspace's options in terms of how it outputs and organizes your data are not good. They're not good. Yeah, use something else. Heck, for my PhD research, I used like Google whatever, not Sheets, but I think maybe it was Sheets. I created surveys in Google Sheets and I collected data. Yeah, Google Forms. That's the one I'm thinking of. Google Forms. I use Google Forms. A lot of people, I think, are in the psych department. I hear a lot about Qualtrics. So yeah, like this nice cleaned up data set is not what Brightspace gives you. I had to do this myself. And that was a pain. I mean, it was a pain at first, right? I started off and I'm like entering the data and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to take forever. I was at it for probably 5 hours. And I know what you're going to say. It is brutal, Will, absolutely. And some of you might be thinking, well, why didn't you just write a script that could, automate the whole process? And I thought, well, as rusty as I am with statistics, I'm even rustier with programming. So it probably would have taken me as long to write a script that worked, um, or longer, frankly, than to just do it manually. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to do it manually. And that's what I did. I tried to minimize mistakes, but since this is a toy study, it's no big deal, right? So that's, I guess, lesson number one, right? Um, yeah, if you're going to use, yeah, that's right. You would have had to clear ethics. That's another reason why this is not a proper study, right? Obviously, these results aren't getting published. They're not strictly speaking for research. They're more for illustration. If I do a proper study, yes, it will have to, if I want to give students course credit for participating in research, which is what SONA is for, then it absolutely has to go through the Carleton University Research Ethics Board, or CURIB. It would go through B, because that is the board that deals with like psychology research and stuff like that. Um, you would also, if any of you were thinking of leading a study, you have to have your certification from SHRC, for working with human subjects. Um, the Carleton University Research Ethics Board will ask you for that. Like you have to be, qualified. You have to have taken the little mini course and passed the quizzes, to be able to submit something where you're actually working with human subjects. I do have that, incidentally. But because this is not research, we're not doing that. But yeah, if you are going to do this, you've got to worry about ethics clearance, and you or somebody on your research team has to be able to perform research on human subjects and know how to do it ethically. You have to submit an ethics, like a report that explains exactly what you're going to do, why you're doing it, outlines any risks. If you're going to use deception, you have to report that. If there's a worry about like incidental findings, you have to talk about how you would deal with those. You have to talk about how data will be kept anonymous. I'll be keeping this anonymous by deleting all of it as soon as we're done. But you'll see I've already anonymized it for the purposes of today by getting rid of people's names and assigning them numbers. So I don't know who any of these people are. Like I really don't know. Um, let's talk about our sample size. Okay, so we're drawing from participation elements one and two. Um, so obviously, um, because I'm looking at composite scores for these individual participants, and I want my data to be in the right format to analyze. This is called a wide format. I've organized it by participant. We've anonymized all of the names, and I manually inputted this, and then I reorganized everything and calculated the composite averages. But the sample size, we got 48 people, which is pretty good. Pretty good sample size for something like this. Um, Many more of you completed one or both of the participation elements. But again, because I've got to do it in this wide format, and I don't want any empty cells, what I had to do was get rid of the data points for participants who only completed one of these. Now, that doesn't mean you didn't get the mark, right? If you completed one of these, you get 5%. If you completed two, you get 10% toward your final mark as a sort of participation bonus, right? So if your data don't appear here, that's okay. You still got the mark. But I had to take away people who only completed one and people who only completed two. And that left us with 48 participants. So that's our sample size. That would be reported in your results by the letter N, right? N equals 48. That's my sample size. If this were a proper study, we also probably would have collected other information, like demographic information. We would have asked probably about age, gender, and your major. I think those would be interesting things to have looked at. But again, because I'm super rusty on my stats, I didn't want to bite off more than I could chew. So, we're not going to learn everything there is to learn here because we didn't ask all of the questions. But those are questions that we could have asked, right? Age, gender, maybe age has an effect, right? On belief levels or knowledge levels or something, right? It's possible. Likewise with gender or maybe what you're studying, right? We could have asked more questions, but we didn't. But if you do a study like this in the future, like if you're in psychology or cognitive science or neuroscience, you might do a study like this for your honors thesis potentially, right? So we want to analyze the data. How are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to show you this cool little program. This is called JASP. I used this a little bit um, when I was doing my PhD. Oh, I just remembered. I forgot to check if the transcript was working. Got so excited. All right, sorry about that. Um, so this is called JASP. It's a free statistics software program thingy. I used it in grad school a little bit because I wanted to do some Bayesian statistics, and JASP allows you to do Bayesian statistics. So when you're doing your typical statistics, it only really tells you about what has happened, right? Um, like let's say I'm doing a t-test. We're not actually going to do a t-test today. I'll get into the reasons why. But let's say I had some data like from before and after, and I wanted to compare them, I might do a t-test. And that could tell me, um, whether my experimental intervention resulted in a statistically significant difference between 1 and 2, and it could tell me the effect size, so the magnitude of my manipulating the variables and the strength of the relationship um, between the variables I was manipulating and the results that I got. So I could do that. But that only tells me what happened. Bayesian statistics allows you to look at the probability of what might happen beyond just your experiment, like how likely it is that you might see something similar in a future experiment or in the real world. So I thought that was kind of cool. We're not going to do any Bayesian stuff today. The first thing we need to do is load our data. So we're going to go to new data and we're going to go here. We're going to go to sync data and we need to sync um, that data that I was just looking at um, with JASP. So we're going to select full paranormal survey. These are what Brightspace gives you, individual attempts, which is the real messy one, and it gives you a summary report, which is the composite averages, if I'm not mistaken. But we load that up, and basically JASP can read the spreadsheet, and now we can do all kinds of analysis, right? So look, we can see participant number, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Knowledge for traditional religious beliefs, pre. It's important to label your data clearly, right? And from there, we can do all kinds of analyses. Oh, one thing I wanted to talk about, actually, which I figure is worth sharing with you in the interest of transparency. So we're in the age of AI. And I know that I don't like ChatGPT because it's used for nefarious purposes, writing essays and uh, test answers and so forth, right? But I was speaking with a student, not a student of mine, but I was actually down at the coffee shop, and one of my former students was working there, and he was chatting with one of the other workers who's I think, a computer science student. And so we were chit-chatting, right? Like, oh, what do you teach? Oh, I'm teaching philosophy of the paranormal right now, but usually what I'm doing is mind and like ethics of AI and stuff. And the conversation went toward ChatGPT, and my student and his coworker are asking me, "What do you think?" And I was like, "Well, I kind of hate it. I mean, as I've said to you, like in the essay writing lecture, I think it is actually quite helpful to have basically what is a search engine slash virtual assistant that you can talk to in natural language. That is actually quite something, right? As I said before, it reminds me of the computer on the Starship Enterprise, right? So if you are a Star Trek fan like I am, or maybe you're a Star Wars fan and you're more familiar with droids than with starships. It's the same thing, right? It's like an AI that you can talk to in natural language, and that's really helpful. You can talk to it, type out your questions instead of, you know, writing code, right? So we agreed. Oh yes, it's certainly helpful for that. But this coworker of my former student told me that her professors love ChatGPT because it is so good at helping people with programming. I have a very old friend. Actually, it was my buddy that I mentioned during the lucid dreaming lecture, who had he was doing the counting technique, and he had a dream where he was writing the numbers down in math class, and his math teacher told him, "You're not supposed to have a lucid dream right now. You're supposed to be working." Uh, well, anyway, he works in cybersecurity. He writes a lot of code, and he's also told me how helpful ChatGPT is for writing code. I just don't like it because of how it's used to cheat and because it is enormously um, resource intensive, right? It uses a lot of electricity, it uses a lot of water. So there are ethical concerns there. There are also ethical concerns. regarding intellectual property, right? Because it is kind of a plagiarism machine. That said, in the interest of transparency, I'll tell you that I thought that I would use ChatGPT to reorganize my data from Brightspace. And let me tell you something. I am not impressed. Um, this thing just could not do what I wanted it to do. Repeatedly, just giving it clear instructions for how I wanted the spreadsheet reorganized. It would either give me a new spreadsheet with no data in it or data that was all the same, right? Like I would get good labels for my data, like these labels that you see on the screen, but then all of these would be like five. Um, and I think it's doing that partly because of hallucination and partly because it doesn't understand what it's doing, right? ChatGPT does not exist in a physical environment like we do. So, it's not like we are embodied beings embedded in a world. Our cognition extends out from the brain through the body into the environment, and our perception is inactive in the sense that it's an active process, not a passive process. ChatGPT is not like that, right? And that's why it doesn't really understand much because it's not in the environment that we are in. Lena, yeah, I that is that is kind of the impression I get, right? Like I'm telling it, okay, what I need you to do is reorganize my data. Sure thing. Just give me that spreadsheet and I'll do it for you. So I give it the spreadsheet and it's does its thing and spits it out and all of the rows and columns are blank and I'm like, something went wrong. This isn't quite right. Hey, you're absolutely right. Let's get to the bottom of this. Do and and then it tries to figure it out and it doesn't, right? Um so just like how I advise you not to use Brightspace to collect data, I mean it's good for a survey like our special topics poll. It's fine for that. It is not good for doing this. Use something else. Use Qualtrics. Use Google Forms. There are so many better options. Um, and don't use ChatGPT to restructure your data. You can use SPSS, right? I don't know how good JASP is at restructuring data. I didn't really use it for that, but SPSS allows you to move your data around, change from like a long format to a wide format. So we're in wide format. If I wanted to run different analyses and I needed like let's say I wanted to run an ANOVA, right? Like an analysis of variance, then I'm going to need a different format. And SPSS can do that for you. And you can get access to SPSS. Like it's on certain computers in the labs around Carleton. If you're teaching or if you're like a research assistant or a teaching assistant, you can contact like ITS and get it installed on your computer and it's all covered by your tuition and but you can reorganize your data in SPSS. It's just I don't have SPSS. So I did it manually, which is brutal, but once you get into the swing of things, it's not that bad. You're just kind of like, okay, numbers, 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 do, and you kind of get into a flow, and it's not so bad, but it is daunting when you first begin. Holly asks, how do Bayesian stat models differ from inferential statistics you can get from a regression model? Um, I do find that chat is good for troubleshooting Word or SPSS issues. Yeah, I think ChatGPT is good again, you're using it as a virtual assistant, so you're talking to the computer as you would a person. And when it comes to that kind of thing, I mean, ChatGPT is drawing on just what it knows from reading the internet. Um, so it's more reliable in that regard. I think the problem comes when you ask it to actually do something novel, right? Um, But yeah, how do Bayesian stat models differ from what you can get from a regression model? Well, I think you're asking the wrong person, right? I think I'm a little bit too rusty. All I really know, or all I really remember, is that um, Bayesian stats is really more. It's more about the probability that you will make a similar observation in the future. I guess you can kind of get a sense of that from your confidence intervals, right? Over like 100 trials just like this, 95% of them would probably give you the same result. Um, but Bayesian statistics is more about like I think what you can expect to observe maybe outside the lab. At least the way we used them was we were looking at things like people's emotional responses to virtual agents. And they could be more mechanical or more human-like. Um, and we were interested in whether any of the variables that we were working with, whether we could then predict whether whether we could say with confidence that okay, these features, if somebody has like high cognitive empathy, and they're dealing with a very robot-like humanoid artifact, they will probably respond this way, right? It was just kind of like a little icing on the cake, but it has honestly been so long that I'm probably not the right person to ask, right? You'll want to ask your psych professor, because I'm no statistician, right? Um, and I should say that I was also the kind of student who did enjoy statistics once I got the hang of it. However, I also had a lot of math anxiety, which I think goes back a lot of years. I was always better with words than I was with numbers. I'm not bad at math, but I'm really good with language. So that it looks like I'm bad with math, and I've never had the confidence, right? Um, yeah, my stats professor was Joanne Lefebvre from cognitive science, actually, and she told me a lot about her research, which some of it concerns math anxiety, right? And I was meeting with her, and I was like, I'm just not getting it, And she said, you know what your problem is? Well, she didn't say it like this, but you know what your problem is, Josh, is math anxiety, right? You're not bad at this. You're just not confident enough. And I still deal with that, right? So one of these days I'm going to refresh my knowledge on all of this stuff. I'm going to design another study and run it and have a great time with it. But until that time, ask your statistics teacher. They'll be able to answer a lot better than I can, and they'll also be able to tell you more about the theoretical side of stuff. Like when I use a program like this, I am very much like the person who uses a calculator without having memorized all the formulae. Right? That's what I'm doing. Just in the interest of being transparent with all of you, right? I'm not trying to make it look like I'm some sort of statistics wizard because I'm not. Um, so that's what I wanted to say. If you want to reorganize your data, don't use ChatGPT, okay? Get yourself SPSS, clean it manually. It's daunting, but it's doable. Um, just be very careful of using generative AI because it can screw up all your data and you might unless you check. Like I was checking as I went and I looked at the numbers and I was like, no, these are all wrong. But ChatGPT was just doing that intern thing. Like Lena said, oh gosh, boss, you're right. I screwed it up. I'll fix it right away. And then it comes back and it's still wrong. It's just wrong in a different way, right? Okay, so we want to do some analysis. And like Jones and Zusne, I kind of want to see whether overall knowledge goes up and overall belief comes down. That's what I want to look at. And I also want to look at a few individual items because there were some interesting little things I saw in the data. certain beliefs that were immune to change, not belief in one's own psychic ability, although we will look at that one. But there were certain beliefs that were immune to change. And I think it would be interesting to talk about why, because when you're running the numbers, you run your numbers, you get your results, great. You have to make sense of those results, right? Once you've done your analysis, you present those results. If you were writing a paper or doing a conference presentation, right, you would tell the audience what your study is about. You'd give them a bit of a lit review. You would describe your methodology, your hypothesis. Then you'd have your results, where you show all of the results of your statistical analysis. And then you have a discussion section. And that's where you need to explain why you got the results that you did. And you do that by drawing on other materials. That's where the argumentative part happens, if that makes sense, right? So your stats is that's just part of the process, just part of the process. You still have to try and understand why you got the results you did. So we'll do that by looking at some composite scores and some individual scores. So what should we do? Well, what we're doing here is basically we want to look at overall knowledge or overall belief from participation element one, which is before we dove into the learning materials, and participation element two, which is after we covered most of the learning materials. So we want to see if basically learning about parapsychology, anomalistic psychology, and all of that had some effect on people's self-reported knowledge levels and belief levels. So to do that, I've already generated the composite scores. So this is average knowledge for all of the dimensions, all of the dimensions of the paranormal belief scale, right? The questions concerning beliefs all have to do with traditional religious beliefs, psi, witchcraft, superstition, spiritualism, extraordinary life forms, and precognition. And we can look at the pre and posts on these individually. But as far as like average knowledge of the kinds of things we looked at in class, how did people rate themselves? Well, we take the scores from all of the individual items and we come up with an average. And that's what I've got here. So that's the average for the pre and the post is over here. So what we're doing is comparing two composite averages. We're looking at the whole class. How would we do that? Any stats nerds? I want to see what you say, and whether you caught on to my earlier hint about what kind of test we'll be doing. Well, we could do a t-test. Yeah, we could do a t-test. But before we do a t-test, we need to make sure that some of our assumptions hold. Yeah, t-test would be the most simple. What? Look, for example's sake, why don't we just start with a t-test? Because I want to show you something. Well, first, let's look at descriptives. It's always a good idea to look at your descriptive statistics just to get a sort of sense of the data. You know, um, uh, well, both Professor Lefebvre and Dr. Van Bentham in the ACE lab, she also taught me a lot about this stuff because that's where I did my PhD work. And each of them used to talk about your data as something you kind of have to sit with and savor, right? You need to really, kind of sit back and take a nice look at everything and get a sense of how your data look before you know what tests to run. Maybe your data are like a delicious cup of coffee, right? You want to sit back and like, yeah, enjoy that data. You don't want to be like, Gangnam style coffee in one shot, just knocking it back, right? You don't want to be doing that. You want to sit and savor it. So let's do that by looking at some descriptives. So we go here to descriptive statistics. So what do we want to look at? Well, let's look at average knowledge from before we got underway and average knowledge after we learned about the paranormal. Oh, good. You're getting ahead of me, Holly. That's good though. Um, yes. So, valid. All of our data points are good. We're not missing anything. Yeah, so you're probably better at this than I am right now, Holly. Um, let's look at our mean. Actually, let's add some things, right? Let's add the median, because the data we're dealing with are ordinal data. Oh, you just want to see the output. Yeah, fair. Um, these data are ordinal. What that means is like I'm not measuring something like I'm not measuring like reaction time, where it's like a real value that I'm measuring in, seconds or milliseconds. I'm asking people to, rate their level of agreement with a statement. So it's not real numbers from real like phenomenon that I'm measuring. They're ordinal. Like ordinal data is also like why not ratio used to Likert? Well, we'll get there. Um, like ordinal data. Let's say there's a race, like a race, like in the Olympics, right? Um, so uh, I can measure the time it took from everybody to get to the start to the finish, right? But I can also look at who came in first, third, or first, second, third, fourth, fifth, etc., right? So if I'm looking at like first place, second place, third place, that's ordinal data. It's ordered, right? So, um, so we can look at the mean, but I also want to look at the median, or the mode. Maybe I want to look at the mode. These are all different measures of central tendency. So the mean is the average. The median is the number right in the middle, and I think the mode is the number that occurs most often. Let's just look at all of them. So mode for average knowledge pre is well, actually quite low, but it did go up after the learning materials. Likewise with the median, less of a change with the mean, but still a change. Yeah, let's look at skew and kurtosis. Okay, so skewness 0.134. Oh, interesting. It goes down. I'm not really sure how to interpret that, but what I really wanted to do is this, the Shapiro-Wilk test. Because what I want to understand um, is how my data are distributed. Like I could do a t-test. T-tests are pretty robust, but if your data is non-parametric, or if certain assumptions like normal distribution are violated, you might want to do a different test. So that's actually what I'm looking at this for, right? We're going to look at the Shapiro-Wilk test results. So we want to look at the p-value of our Shapiro-Wilk test. So average knowledge pre, we get a p-value of 0.155 and after 0.865. You think it's good, Holly? I Now, if I remember, I need my p-value. I need it to check my assumptions. I forget whether it needs to be greater than. It needs to be greater than 0.05, and these are both greater than 0.05. So yeah, actually, I think we are good. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you're right, Holly. Yeah. I'm keeping a lot of things in my head right now. But that's good. So, okay. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing that here, let's just to keep it simple, let's just go with mean. So let's get rid of those. So we know that there is a little bit of a change. We know that average knowledge scores did seem to go up compared from after you'd learned everything compared to when before you had learned everything. So there was a change. Okay, great. Now we want to understand if that change is statistically significant. So we'll do as Holly said, we'll do a t-test. So we're going to do an independent. No, we're going to do no, we're going to do paired samples t-test. Now, if our assumption of normality was violated, we would do a Wilcoxon signed rank. We wouldn't do a student t-test, but we're going to do a student t-test. And like Holly said, we also have to set our hypotheses, right? So, what do we want our hypotheses to be? Measure one is going to be, well, let's put our variable pairs in there. So, average knowledge pre and average knowledge post. So that's our variable pair. We're going to look at those. Um, we're doing the student t-test. It's not for students. It's named after a guy called student, right? So it's not like this is the t-test that students do. No, no, it's not like that. But yeah, we want to set our hypotheses up. So our null hypothesis is always like nothing happened, right? But our alternative hypothesis, let's just keep it simple. It could be that measure one is not the same as measure two. And you can see here that measure one is the pre-learning ratings and the post-learning ratings. So let's just keep it like that. And we want effect size because effect size tells us the magnitude of the effect. All right, so let's see what we got. So, is there a difference between knowledge before learning and after learning? Well, will you looky here. That p-value, 0.002. What does that mean? Yeah, significant. Now, significance, um, what this means is that depending on how you set your limit, um, because I can set my p-value whatever I want. Like I could have it zero point zero 0.01, 0.05, 0.001. Like I can choose the sort of cutoff, right? But what this means is that the difference between these average scores is probably not due to chance. And what is it that happened between the when you took these two tests? Well, you learned a bunch of stuff about the paranormal. So it's not just a coincidence that your knowledge levels changed. It's likely due. There was a difference, which we saw in our descriptive statistics, and what this analysis tells us is that um, it's not due to chance. The only other thing it might be due to was you learning more about the paranormal. Isn't that neat? That's so cool. Yeah, let's talk about the effect size. So for the t-test, it's Cohen's d, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, that's decent. It is negative though, which is interesting. Why would it be negative? I suppose it could be negative. Oh, it doesn't matter. Okay, so for the Wilcoxon sign rank test, it actually does matter, and that's actually the analysis I had run prior to doing this class. So why don't we take a look at the Wilcoxon sign rank? So this is what you would use, like if you want to do something like a t-test, but but maybe your data violates the assumption of normality, which we can actually check if we wanted to. But again, I want to keep things simple. This is not a stats class. This is meant to be a fun, nerdy thing that we do to finish off the semester, right? Um, so let's say your data violates the assumption of normality, or let's say you're using non-parametric data. So Likert stuff is like that, right? So I can use this test, and let's see. Measure one, measure two, it's pre and post, just like before. Um, Okay, it looks like it's still significant. The P is 0.001. So either way, t-test or Wilcoxon signed rank, we're getting a significant result here. So you would report this, like if you were writing up a study, you would say what tests you did. So you only report significant results in your studies, right? You don't report like every non-significant result, only the significant stuff. So you would say like, oh, for example, we compared average knowledge of the items on the paranormal belief scale prior to class getting underway and after class was complete. And we applied a Wilcoxon signed rank test, which revealed a statistically significant difference. And you would report your p-value and your effect size and all of the juicy stuff that the statisticians like. This is, by the way, the effect size that you get from a Wilcoxon signed rank test. You get a rank by serial correlation, and here it actually does matter that we're getting a negative number because that means a negative correlation. So this is a big effect size, but it's going in kind of a funny direction. I would expect this. Well, actually, we can change our hypothesis, and we still get a negative number. Still negative. Okay, that's fine. Oh yeah, it does it yeah, measure one less than measure two, it's still significant. But our direction doesn't change. How could we explain this? Well, knowledge scores seem to have gone up, and that was statistically significant. We saw that with the t-test. And we saw that we had a good effect size. But why would this be negative? Um, it could be because even though knowledge scores on average were a little bit higher, that could have been the result of dramatic increases in knowledge on certain items, um, but knowledge going down overall throughout the answers on the post questionnaire. So maybe somebody feels like they learned a lot more about spiritualism, but they feel like they know less about traditional religious beliefs and witchcraft and superstition. That might be what this means. That's interesting because, yeah, the magnitude, you're right. The magnitude, positive or negative, it's still a big effect size. Um, yes, Leo, that's exactly where I was going with this. It appears that we have uncovered statistical evidence for the Socratic virtue, or like Will says, Dunning-Kruger, right? The Dunning-Kruger effect is where people who are not very knowledgeable about something overestimate their knowledge, and people who are very knowledgeable underestimate their knowledge. Like if you ask Josh, like me, Josh, how much I know about philosophy when I was an undergrad, I would say, oh, I know so much about philosophy. If you ask me now, when I actually do know much more about philosophy, I would say, oh boy, I've barely scratched the surface of philosophy. That's the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? It's named after this guy who tried to rob a bank. Does anyone know the story? Of a guy who was maybe not the sharpest tool in the shed who tried to rob a bank. And so he's thinking to himself, well, I don't want to be seen by the security cameras, so I need to make myself invisible. So what does he do? He puts lemon juice all over his face. Why? Well, lemon juice is you can use it for like invisible ink, right? You can write a message on a piece of paper with lemon juice and you don't see it unless you hold it up to a light. So the message is invisible unless it's looking the right way. And so this gentleman, I guess, thought that the lemon juice would make him invisible to the security cameras. Very interesting. Interesting. It did not work, obviously. But that's what the effect is named after. This guy who thought that lemon juice would make him invisible. So yeah, it's kind of like that's an interesting incidental finding that I would talk about. I wouldn't put it in terms of the Dunning-Kruger effect because the Dunning-Kruger effect is one of those effects that might actually be hard to replicate. Um, However, I would characterize this as the Socratic virtue. Socrates, right, during his trial is accused of corrupting. He's corrupt. He's accused of corrupting the youth and of impiety. So he's put on trial, and he's got a jury of 501 of his peers, Athenian citizens, so older male guys from Athens who had money and property and stuff. And they were going to decide if Socrates really was corrupting the youth. And one of the other accusations leveled against Socrates that was that he was a sophist. You know, sophists were sort of like itinerant teachers who would go around the ancient world, and they would charge people money to teach them. And there were different kinds of sophists. Like there were the encyclopedists. They went around studying stuff and writing it down, making records of stuff. Um, but the ones that people tended to have a bad impression of were the sophists of Eristic. So these were the sophists who taught you um, uh, public speaking skills and rhetoric. Um, if you were a wealthy Athenian and you had a son, you would make sure your son had a sophist, a wise guy, to teach him how to debate, how to argue, because that was an important part of public life. You'd go. Athenian democracy wasn't as inclusive as our democracy is. You had to be an older property owning man. Women could not vote. Young men could not vote. Anyone who didn't own property couldn't vote. And of course, if you were property, you couldn't vote because ancient Greeks had slavery. Um, so Socrates is kind of accused of being a sophist, and he takes issue with that because sophists always take money for their teachings, and sophists also there was a tendency um, for certain sophists to kind of preach a sort of relativism. Uh, and Socrates and Plato seem to have had a problem with that. Socrates talks about how these sophists just make the weaker argument the stronger. They don't actually use reason. They use bullshit. They use their oratory skills rather than actually doing things properly. So Socrates says, I've never taken money for my teachings, so I'm not a sophist. And they reply, well, what about the oracle at Delphi, right? Your friend Caraphon went to the oracle and he received an oracle because you go to the oracle and the oracle gives you an oracle, right? And that oracle told Caraphon that Socrates is the wisest of men. So you're the wisest of men, Socrates. Even the oracle of Delphi says so. So how are you going to defeat this accusation of being a sophist? And Socrates says, if I am wisest, it's only because I know that I know not, right? And that's what might have been happening here. After learning about all of this, like with the Dunning-Kruger effect, you realized how much more you had to learn, how much more you didn't know. Fascinating, isn't it? Maybe we should look at belief. So let's get rid of these variable pairs, and we're gonna do a new one. We're gonna do let's see, average belief, pre and post. Go back to the t-test. So same thing. Look at that. It's giving us some descriptive statistics. Let's just make sure that it's giving us the right. No, that's from the previous one. So we want our descriptive statistics first. So average belief pre. Average belief post. Let's look at, we'll just keep it on the mean. Let's do skewness, kurtosis, and a Shapiro-Wilk test. P-value of Shapiro-Wilk. Okay. Maybe we're violating some assumptions here, but it's okay. It looks like, oh, look at that. Average belief. Like we've got a lot of items here. But average belief in all toward as reflected by your answers to those questions isn't super high, but it does get lower as the class wraps up. Interesting. Why might that have been? And while you're thinking of it, let's go. We'll go back over to the. I'll get the t-test ready. Hmm. Let's do effects. Oh, I can just click here, get my descriptives. Yeah. So, knowledge went up and belief went down, which is kind of what Jones and Zusne observed in their little study. Why would belief go down? Well, probably for the same reasons that knowledge went up, right? Yeah, learning how to be skeptical. And remember, if there's one thing I really want you to take away when it comes to understanding skepticism, it's not just doubting for the sake of doubting. It's not dismissing claims because they sound extraordinary, right? You don't want to be that kind of I think that's the wrong way to do skepticism, right? Skepticism, remember, comes from this word skepsis, which means to investigate or to inquire. And so a skeptic inquires in order to see whether their beliefs meet the standards of knowledge. That's what skepticism, true skepticism is. It doesn't mean we say things like, "Oh, you think you had a psychic experience? Well, you're nuts." That's not skepticism. Skepticism would be like, okay, that's an extraordinary claim. How can we try and see whether there is extraordinary evidence for that claim? That is skepticism, right? So yeah, you've definitely learned to be more skeptical. And I think maybe what's happened here is that some students who were like, yeah, maybe I kind of believe that, or I really believe that, overall it kind of went down to if you were like, yeah, I believe that, to I'm not sure anymore if I believe that, right? So there's a little bit of a change there. So nothing too surprising there. But interestingly, there were some beliefs that were very resistant to change, which makes sense. And we're going to look at some of those now. One, this is where it's going to get a little tricky because I have to find. So let's get rid of these variable pairs. So one that seemed pretty immune to change was belief in God, which makes sense. That makes actually, I think that makes quite a bit of sense, given what we talked about in class and our approach to the material. Um, so let's look at our descriptives down here. So average belief in God before we got underway was 4.35 out of 8. Um, let's see. After it was 4.271. Pretty big standard deviation, which I guess we should expect. Um, Now, what do these results mean? If I get myself out of the way here. If I look at the p-value, what does that p-value tell me? So first of all, like there is not a big change. Like not a big change at all. And the change that did occur was not was not statistically significant. What does that mean? Yeah, nothing happened. Basically, I look at this and nothing happened. I can't reject the null hypothesis because that's what we're doing when we do this, right? We're not confirming the experimental hypothesis or the alternative hypothesis. We're not proving that hypothesis. We're trying to reject the null hypothesis. It's falsification, right? Remember how we talked about science is not about verifying, but about falsifying? Well, here what I've done is I've this result tells me that I have not falsified the null hypothesis. And yeah, Cohen's d is it's tiny effect size. So what would you say? I would say just from looking at the data in the spreadsheet, it was easy to tell that if people if people believed in God before, they tended to still believe in God after. And if people didn't believe in God before, they did not believe in God after. So belief or disbelief in God seems to be pretty immune, um, to the sorts of materials we covered. And that's not really surprising because this is not like a class on theology, right? It's not about that. And changing levels of belief in God was not one of the things we were trying to do. So this makes sense. Actually, we could look if we go back to descriptives, um, and we'll put those let's see, I believe in God, pre and post, and I want to look at some plots. Let's see, Likert plots. This is really good because it helps you visualize the data. So belief in God pre. This color is everybody who voted 8, and you can see there's quite a significant chunk. And this dark gold sort of color is the amount of people who answered 1. And you can see it's a lot of people. Well, something like 25, over 25%. I guess if you answered 1, you're like an atheist. And if you answered 8, you're a full-on believer. Yeah, so 52% is distributed over here. So more than half of you were skeptical about God's existence, but a good chunk of those people answered 1, and a good chunk of the people who did believe, which was just under half, um, uh, very strongly believed in God. That's before. Let's look at, let's just briefly, actually, let's look at whether there's a devil. There's a devil. We can see if it looks like the same. And it kind of does. I think more people seem to be on the side of not believing in the devil than those who believe in the devil. But of the people that do believe and disbelieve, there's a good chunk of you who answered either 1 for I completely disagree, and 2 for completely agree, or 8 for completely agree. That's very interesting because so if you were to put this on like a box plot, which I guess I could do, but I don't know where the button is. Um, and so if you had like 8, not a box plot, but a histogram, if you had, from 1 to 8, 1 and 8 would be high, and then you'd kind of have like a dip in the middle, right? Let's see if we can let's see if we can do that with a distribution plot. Yeah, see? So you can see, and let's just add post for belief in the devil. Okay, there is a devil. We'll add that in there. So yeah, belief in God and belief in the devil is a pretty interesting distribution. Most people either believe or don't believe, and it looks like same for the devil. Interesting. I've got the wrong belief in there. Belief. Let's get rid of that. We need the right post belief in God. There. So yeah, not too much. Yeah, bimodal, exactly. Bimodal. So that's interesting. So belief and disbelief in God and the devil are quite high. The number of people who are more or less, skeptical or believers is much lower. So a lot more people were very certain or they strongly agreed or strongly disagreed that God exists and that a devil exists. So that's another thing you can do to get a sense of what your data look like. Put them into charts and plots. It helps you visualize the data. This is more about like mm, savoring that delicious data. This is the coffee. This is the coffee cup of data right here. I've decided. So look at things before you do your analyses, right? Okay, now we can go back. Let's just do some paired sample t-tests. Yeah, what did we already establish? Well, belief in God doesn't seem to change that much, and any changes that there are not significant, and the effect size is tiny. So we can't reject the null hypothesis. So we have failed to falsify if our hypothesis were that taking a class on the paranormal would change belief in supernatural entities like God or Satan, we would have to say no, it actually doesn't, at least not based on what we've observed here. What are some other interesting individual items that we can look at? Well, I have a couple in mind. One is the abominable snowman. This is another one that I looked at. Well, let's put some, can we do some plots, descriptive plots maybe? That's not really that helpful. Maybe we'll go back. But just look at this. Like we probably don't even need to look at a plot, but um, nobody believes in the abominable snowman. Look at this. The mean score for before and after 1.958 and 1.813. So that reflects, agreement predominantly with uh, or disagreement with the statement the abominable snowman of Tibet exists. So I could see this just by looking at the spreadsheet. Like actually, if I go back to the spreadsheet, try to find the abominable snowman. Yeah, like just look at that column. Like it's all quite low. As I scroll through, oh, there's one person who rated 7. So one serious believer in the abominable snowman, but everyone else is quite skeptical of the abominable snowman. And I just thought that was funny. Poor abominable snowman. Yeah, you're right, Bell. I mean, Bigfoot is hard to believe in, although there are Bigfoot enthusiasts who certainly agree that he does exist. Actually, after I delivered that lecture, I started diving into a bunch of clips on the Animal Planet YouTube channel of finding Bigfoot, and like, oh my God, like, I'm not sure if these people actually believe in Bigfoot, you know. I mean, maybe Bobo does. But I think, we all kind of know, like, okay, like we know that they're making this show for entertainment. Although I don't know, Bobo, there's something about Bobo where he's an interesting fellow. So who knows the individual I'm talking about from Finding Bigfoot? Because if you do, I think it's not out of the question to suppose that Bobo actually does believe in Bigfoot, where the others are maybe they kind of know what's up, but oh, with the very frightening doll, with the mechanical like death doll. Is that the one you mean? It looks all robotic and horrible. This guy Bobo, yeah. So this guy Bobo, I mean, you just have to watch. Bobo is his nickname. It's not his real name, but he just has this like deadpan monotone, like kind of like, "Wow, I can't wait to see a Squatch today." Like, he's just got this very interesting vibe about him. Oh, I haven't seen the Unsolved Mysteries episode, but I will. I will watch it. Um, Interesting. Okay. I'd be down to check that out. It sounds like an interesting episode. I actually like the paranormal episodes more than the true crime stuff. Even though I don't believe in the paranormal, I still seem to find those episodes more interesting and more entertaining than when they do like a murder mystery one. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, because Navajo Rangers, so they would be like the police force of the not the municipalities on the reserve, but over the whole territory. Is that how that would work? They'd be kind of like the yeah, like a state trooper. I was going to say the Navajo equivalent of the OPP, right? Yeah, very interesting. Oh, I will check that out, Ollie. Absolutely. Now another one that I want to look at just for funsies is belief in uh belief in one's own psychic ability. Because Jones and Zisney report that that was one belief that was relatively immune to change. But what I want to start by looking at um, is whether people believe that they have some kind of psi abilities. So let's put these questions here. So I have latent psi abilities or psychic abilities pre and post. So recall, for Jones and Zisney, this was a belief that was robust. It was difficult to change by exposure to more knowledge of the paranormal. But look at this. Um, very low, very low scores. Seems most people believe they do not have latent psychic abilities. And we could go to some basic plots to get a look. Okay, Likert plots. Yep, look at that. Looks like a few people answered high. Belief, it looks like belief did change a bit because in the pre-survey, there was actually some sixes and sevens, but nobody agrees any higher than five. Now, that could be because maybe some people who rated their belief in their own psychic abilities high on the first test didn't complete the second participation element. You've got to think of that as well, right? But overall, it seems like most of us don't believe we have latent psychic abilities. Yeah, like dormant, like kind of like how remember the psychical researchers when we learned about them, the Society for Psychical Research, and a lot of them thought of psi or psychic abilities. They didn't call it psi at that time, but they understood these as maybe things that certain people have, but that others um, don't have yet or have yet to develop. Or think of um, Targ, Russell Targ, who was like, we have these abilities, but we need to access them by quieting the conscious mind, right? I suppose if I were to run this survey again, like this is the one question that was not part of the paranormal belief in the paranormal scale. This is a question that I added myself because I wanted to see what it would look like. Um, if I were to do this again, and this is the benefit of doing like a toy study, is you can learn things, right? So if I were to do this again, maybe what I would do is take that word latent out, just because it's not a word that we use very often. And I would just change the question to, I have psychic abilities. And then I would see. what happens, right? So that's really interesting. A lot of people don't believe they have any psychic abilities. So we probably don't need to do a t-test, but like, what the hell? Let's do one anyway. Um, okay, let's see. I have latent psychic abilities. Get those in there for our variable pairs. We want effect sizes. Tell us the descriptives again so that it's there on the page for us. Not significant, tiny effect size. And yeah, like the difference is not big. It's not significant. And whatever we did doesn't seem to have much of effect on what difference there is. So we could say that we could actually conclude um, that maybe this is still a robust belief. It's just in the opposite direction. Jones and Zisney observed people who did believe they had psychic powers, and we observed that most of us don't believe that, and that didn't seem to change. Yeah. So the wording, I agree with you, Leo. I was using the wording from the belief in the paranormal scale. So this question is the only one I came up with myself. And then the knowledge questions were just drawn from the different dimensions on the belief scale. Um, but you're right. I think some of them were worded like, yeah, the witches one. You're absolutely right. Um, Actually, why don't we look at the witches and we'll keep some of Leo's comments in mind as we look at witches. So let's go back to descriptives. And we want to know if people agree with the statement witches do exist. There it is. Witches do exist, pre and post. Okay, so what do we got here? Let's test for normality. Oh, maybe our data aren't distributed properly here, but or normally, but that's fine. We're not too worried about that. Yeah, Bell, exactly. That's kind of where we're going with this. It's like it really kind of turns on, what do you mean by witches, right? Like people are going to understand this differently. Let's look at some plots. We can look at more Likert plots. Or actually, let's do a distribution plot. Oh, interesting. So there is a bimodal distribution um, for the pre-test, but not for the post-test. There seems to be a sort of negative trend for the post-test. That's very interesting. The difference, yeah, there is a difference. There is a difference. So I would run, so if you see something like this, if you see something interesting happen, then you can do a test after you've looked at your descriptive statistics. So let's hop over to t-test and do a paired samples t-test. And we're going to look at, again, belief or agreement with the statement witches do exist. Let's see, witches do exist. All right, and let's get our effect size in there because we want to know that. All right, so what does it say? Oh, interesting. Um, Medium effect size, I think. And this is not significant at P001, but it is at P01. Um, so something did happen here. A bit of a change, somewhat significant, decent effect size. But how do we make sense of this? Right? Because as Leo and Bell were saying, uh there's a little bit of ambiguity in this question. So, yeah, if I were to do this, perhaps what I would do is come up with my own questions. And what I would have to do, I would have to come up with a whole bunch of questions. And then I would run what's called a principal components analysis. And I would see, like, how good the questions are uh, at really picking out the dimensions that I want to know about. This is a bit beyond the scope of what we're doing today, but that's how you put together a questionnaire. That's how you come up with a psychology questionnaire. You come up with a bunch of questions, you ask people, you do a principal components analysis, and you see which questions are the best questions to ask. Um, so alternatively, we could reword the questions. So like witches do exist. What does that mean? Does that mean that there are people who identify as Wiccan, right? Like they're practitioners of Wicca? Well, yeah, obviously those people exist, right? Um, yeah, they exist. Witches exist? Does that mean that these witches have supernatural powers? Well, uh, I would say no. Some people would say yes, right? But I would say no. But that's two different things, right? So witches exist. Sure, like there are people who are witches. They call themselves witches. They do Wicca, and all of that. But then there's like, okay, are there witches who actually are able to use magical powers? How do you answer that, right? Some people would tend to agree or disagree with more or less with either of those options. Like I would say, yes, I agree witches exist because there are people who practice Wicca. So, there it's pretty straightforward. There are witches. But if you mean there are beings like there are practitioners of black magic who can cast spells on me, then I'm going to say no, I don't agree that they exist, right? So it really depends on how we understand that question. So maybe we would look at this together with some other question. What's another one that we could maybe look at this in comparison to? Black magic really exists. How about that one? Let's see what that tells us. Um, oh, interesting. Where's my oh, yeah. Black magic really exists. Um, so not super significant. It's maybe significant at 0.05. Uh, it's actually a higher significance level for when it comes to belief in witches, but overall, it's kind of a similar picture, I suppose. Yeah, to really do this properly, I think what we would do, well, I'd have to restructure the data to do an ANOVA. But I'm just trying to get a sense, like I'm savoring, right? I'm not doing a proper analysis. I'm just like, okay, so that's what the witches stuff looks like. What about the black magic stuff? It does look like it's kind of in the same direction, but to see whether belief in witches pre and post interacted with, like whether there was an interaction pre-post belief in witches and pre-post belief um in black magic, yeah, I think we would have to do an ANOVA of some kind. What kind, I don't know. And whether I need to restructure the data, I would need a refresher. Maybe we can try. Um, Actually, you know what? No, because I don't. I'm too rusty for that right now today. But that's kind of the picture that's emerged. Now, geez, wow, the time is really going by. It's already 4 minutes after four. I've been nerding out so much that the time has just flown by. Yeah. You could even take care of this by asking more questions like, do you believe in black magic, and then have a little sub question like, okay, do you believe witches exist? And then look at what that looks like. Might be interesting to have had more implicit questions like in modern implicit racism scales or implicit. Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I think that's a really cool idea, Will. I wonder if somebody's done that. Like an implicit association test for the supernatural as opposed to um like implicit racism, like you say. Yeah, I wonder if somebody's done that. Might be an interesting honors thesis, if anyone's looking for ideas. So it's 5 minutes after 4. I think we should break. Um, when we come back, we'll come back in 15 minutes. If you want to look at anything else, we can. Any more like pre-post like specific questions, whether that's knowledge or belief. Yeah, Leo, exactly right. Like I say I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm frightened of the haunted house. Well, then I have an implicit belief perhaps in ghosts, right? Um And that would be really interesting to do a comparison between like belief in the paranormal scale, like an explicit measure, and then if you put together some kind of implicit association test for supernatural or paranormal stuff. Someone's got to do this. This is a really good idea, I think, and this could be an interesting research thing. So, um, if you're looking to do an honors thesis, maybe go talk to your supervisor about this. But let's come back at 4:20. When we return, if you want to look at anything else, we can do that. And then I have some sort of wrap up remarks that I would like to make. So I will see you all in about 15 minutes. Okay, see you shortly. Okay, let's get going. Make sure the transcript is working. Very good. Yeah, oh geez, it looks, I guess the first part. Yeah, oh, darn it. Ugh. I'm sorry to whoever needed the transcript. That first little bit got cut off because I forgot to turn it on. But if you're watching this on YouTube, you can also use the uh, automatic captions, I think, in case you need that. Okay, so are there any other things that we want to look at? Anything that you're curious about? Like in terms of belief or knowledge change? Like we've looked at the averages, the composite scores for pre and post knowledge and pre and post belief, and we've looked at a few particular things like the abominable snowman, belief in God, belief in the devil, witches and black magic. Is there anything else you're curious about? I should mention, like, the way that I've organized this does not reflect the dimensions of the test. So, right, the knowledge questions ask you about dimensions, the dimensions of the test. So, how knowledgeable you are you of psi? Well, just to reiterate, there are questions that deal with belief in psi, like this one, um, belief in psychokinesis. Belief in let's see, some psychics can accurately predict the future. Well, that would be precognition, right? But all of these questions fall under one of these dimensions. But I haven't organized it such that it's easy to analyze that way, although you could, right? That is something I did during my PhD where I gave people the one of the things I gave them was the robot anxiety scale, which has certain similar dimensions. I think it has 3 dimensions, and I organized those questions so that I would get an average score for like I'd get all the individual scores, but then I'd get an average score for each dimension and then the overall average. So I could do all kinds of analyses with that. We did that for also with different empathy scales and stuff because we were looking at how cognitive and affective empathy, together with how human-like or machine-like the device is, affects how people relate with these devices, namely robots, virtual assistants, etc. Belief in aliens be resistant to change. Good question. We can look at that. What about the fact that tests could have been influenced by prior knowledge of the test results from the first paper we read? Yeah, that too is a concern. That's why I didn't lecture on that part of the paper. But you could be right. So in future, I like that's another thing to note is that you're not exactly naive participants, because you've read that paper, right? Exactly. So you have a bias. Because you already, for those of you who read that part of the paper, you know what's up, right? And by looking at the tests I gave you, the surveys, you probably were able to guess and what I was doing, and that might have affected how you answered the question. So if we were going to do this properly, I would not have you read that paper until maybe we've completed both of the surveys. Because yeah, you're not naive. So that's like a confound, right? That you want to be careful of. Okay, belief in aliens. Yeah, let's look at belief in aliens. Um, well, let's look specifically at knowledge of extraordinary life forms, which includes aliens. Let's see what kind of stuff do we want to do here. Oh, this is all here we go. Uh, Knowledge went up a little bit. Um, these don't look all that different. It looks like knowledge of extraordinary life forms did go up, though. Did it go up significantly? Let's check by running another t-test. Uh, get some effect size information there. Hmm, okay. So it looks like knowledge went up. Medium effect size, significant at p 0.05. But if we had set our p-value to like 0.005 or 0.001, this would not be significant. Um, let's go back to descriptives and look at belief now. I know that belief in extraterrestrial life was high just from looking at the spreadsheet. Yeah, see, so a mean agreement rating of 6.188. That's pretty good. That's pretty high. Um, Go to where is it? There's no, there's life on other planets. There it is. Um, okay, it looks like belief slightly went very, very slightly up. I don't, well, we can see what happens in a t-test. Um, yeah, we can see if we go to, let's get our, you can see here I've accidentally screwed up the title of one of these markers. So you got to watch out for that. If you make a typo, you want to go back and fix it so that you know what these data are. We won't worry about that right now, but let's see. There is life on other planets, so that's before. And we're going to go down here. There's life on other planets. Where are you? There you are. There's life on other planets. Um, let's get our effect size there. So not significant, absolutely minuscule effect size. So, so there's not much of a difference. So nothing really changed. So again, we failed to reject the null hypothesis here. So, yeah, nothing really happened when it came to this particular question. So a lot of people believe in life on other planets, and that belief didn't really change. Yeah, Leo, that's a good question too, right? Because there's a good core group of you, about 15 to 20 of you, who are here every time for the live lecture, right? And then there's another 20 to 30 that are watching on YouTube. And then there's the rest of them that I think are really just phoning it in. So, and I can tell that. just by the kinds of questions I'm getting about assignments. I'm getting questions like, "Hey, I don't know what to do about this or that," and it's like, well, that was in the lecture that I just gave and that is posted on YouTube. So thanks for letting me know you haven't been watching those. But yeah, so you could divide it up. Maybe you could group people into a number of categories like regular attendance and participation, semi-regular attendance and participation, and no attendance and participation. And then you could see whether there is some interaction between level of participation and level of belief change. For that, I think you would also want to do some kind of ANOVA. Um, but yeah, Leo, that's good. If I do this in future, actually, what I do plan to do in future is actually do this as a proper study. Every time I teach the class, like I want to have everything really well planned out. Everything's going to go through ethics. You're going to get marks through SONA, not just as a participation thing. And so future people in this class will be participants in an ongoing study that I would like to do in this very area. I think that would be very interesting. And then, of course, if any of you want to do something like how Leo was saying before about the implicit bias, and Will and Leo were talking about that. An idea like that would be really cool for, an honors thesis or depending on how much you want to do, maybe even a master's thesis. I think it could be really interesting. It would be a really interesting opportunity for psych students and cognitive science students, even neuroscience too, if you wanted to maybe look at differences in different sorts of brain activity amongst believers and skeptics. Um, there's there's potentially so much you could do. So I would just say, like, keep these ideas in mind for the future, because they could potentially be very interesting and fruitful research projects. Um, yeah, like Holly says, you could do a regression, see which predictor is the strongest. So, does your level of participation better predict belief or skepticism, or is it your age? Is it your cultural background? I think I would almost certainly want to look at cultural background and what you are studying. Um, Cultural background is somewhat obvious, right? I think, for example, when it comes to the questions like belief in God or the devil, I think a lot of that is probably due to cultural background, right? Not necessarily. But what I mean is that if you come from a highly religious background, well, obviously you're more likely to report high levels of belief in God and in the devil, right? Depending on your religion, right? Like if you're from like if you, like the Abrahamic religions, obviously. Not so much if you're like a Hindu or something, obviously, but um, but also what you're studying, I think, can have an effect. Um, your levels of belief might be different if you're a religious studies student versus a philosophy student, just for example. Also, it's not necessarily true that if you come from a religious background, you're going to be very religious yourself. People do change, right? Some people who come from very religious backgrounds abandon a lot of the aspects of their religion, and they might still believe in God, they might not still believe in God, right? Like I know of some people who were brought up, like in like evangelical Christians, and they no longer adhere exactly to their religion, but they still believe in God. And then again, some of them don't believe in the religion and have become atheists, right? So, and it can go the other way. Like, I mean, I've got a cousin, um, who for years, I understood that he was an atheist. Um, he is now getting ready to go to rabbinical school. So, it can go the other way, right? For a long, long time, my cousin was an atheist. Then, uh, then he converted to Judaism, and now he's going to go and become a rabbi. Um, Very interesting. It's an interesting trajectory, because I've kind of always been an atheist and I ended up being a philosophy professor, but my cousin is obviously not an atheist, but also picked a specific religion and decided to become like a teacher. So like we're both teachers in a sense, but very different sorts of teachers. A teacher of philosophy versus a teacher of the Torah. Yeah, very interesting. But yeah, so it can go both ways, right? You could start out an atheist and become a believer. You could be a believer and abandon the religion, but believe in God, or abandon religion and the belief in God. The big five personality traits. Yeah, we would definitely want to look at that. I would be very curious. I would hypothesize that openness to new experiences might be a predictor of belief in the paranormal or the supernatural. Yeah, that's one of the big five traits. Um, let's see if I can remember them all. Openness to experience, neuroticism. Oh, I forget the other three. I took this test. I should know these, but I took this test and I had a really weird profile. But what is it? It's neuroticism, openness to new experiences. Uh, Somebody should just Google this, and we'll find out. I'm gonna Google it because you know what? I'm like Albert Einstein. I don't keep information in my head that is readily available in books or on the internet. Oh, Holly, thank you. You beat me to it. Conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion. You're right. Yes, I remember now. Yes, I did that test in when I was an undergraduate, because I was trying to make sense of my life. And the people at the like student support center, like kind of like I went to Nipissing, so their version of the Paul Menton Center at Carleton, they gave me some stuff, some tests to try to figure out what was happening. I think it turns out after all of the psychometric testing and all of the psychiatric evaluations I've gone through, what it is that I am just a what we call in psychology a weird dude. And yeah, um, I kind of stopped there, but anyway, I did get to kind of take some personality tests and later on some cognitive tests and get like an inside view of how all of this works, and that was a fun experience. But yeah, Holly is right. I think that the big five would be cool. You'd probably want to look at levels of participation and other background elements. Uh, so basically, like this could be a lot bigger than it is. Again, this is a toy. This is like an example. I won't even call it a pilot study. It's not even a pilot study. It's an activity. It's a learning activity. But I think it does give you an idea of the kinds of things you want to think about if you're going to do this work. And this is how we do it. It's it can be tiring, tedious, boring, especially if you have to enter your data by hand. But imagine the days before computers when we were doing statistics. That was all by hand. In fact, the people who did it worked with spreadsheets and they were called computers. Computer used to be a job, not a mechanical digital device like we all have on our desks now. No, computer originally was a job that humans had. Um, yeah, trauma. You mean trauma? Look at trauma, or that doing this work is traumatic? Because I'm laughing because I thought, yeah, entering your data by manually is traumatic. Um, Yeah, yeah, yeah. To study is a very yeah, yeah. To study is a variable. Yes. We don't laugh at that. I'm laughing because I thought, okay, I'm not laughing at anyone's trauma. Um, but yeah, like as a variable, have you been through a traumatic experience would also be good. I'm really glad you're thinking about this, Holly. I don't know what you have in mind for the future about research. But if you want to do a study like this, that could be really interesting. Before anyone asks me, I'm probably not available to supervise things. Okay. I just want to get that out there. Um, the reason is that they keep me very busy with teaching at Carleton, which is not to complain at all. I love teaching. I have kind of gotten off track with a lot of my research because I've been so busy with teaching, but I also really love putting new courses together. I love the interaction with you guys. Um, like I'm still a researcher. I still want to do research. But the last few years, starting around the time of the pandemic up till now, I've really started to think of myself as primarily a teacher. Um, so that's fine. I'm not complaining at all. I love my job. It does keep me quite busy though, which means that I don't know if I'm actually allowed to officially supervise people. I might be, but I don't know if the department would say it's a good idea, right? Just because I'm so busy. What I am willing to do is unofficially advise to be like a consultant. And I have done that for a number of students in the past. So I don't know if I can officially be your supervisor, but if you're working with somebody else and you decide to do something on this and you want a second pair of eyes, I'm absolutely down for that. All I would ask you to do is just give me an acknowledgement. Um, I'm afraid all I can do for now, just with the workload that I have. But if I ever manage to get this study going, I might be looking for students to help with it. And then I would put the word out in the Discord server to any of you who are still around. Um, okay, anything else we want to look at before I wrap up? We are actually running out of time. I do have a couple more things I want to say. Just as like takeaways from the class. Maybe we can look at one more variable if people want to. While I'm waiting to hear from you, I gotta say this has been kind of fun, just as a little exercise, like again in shaking off the rust, blowing out the cobwebs, just kind of getting back into statistics. It is somewhat like riding a bike, it's surprising how quickly it comes back to you. Which is not to say I didn't have to read a whole bunch of stuff to get prepared for this. I did have to do quite a lot of refreshing, but it was nice, and it's got me motivated to do something more serious in the future. So this has been great for me. I hope it's been great for you too. But yeah, are there any other measures we want to look at? We've looked at quite a bit. But this is what you want to do when you do a study, right? You want to like look around at the data, look at it. Don't be intimidated by all of it. It can be intimidating, but you get your fingers in the data, get your hands in there and start looking around and you start seeing interesting stuff and then you're like, "Why am I seeing that? I'll do this analysis and see why I observed this and this other thing." And it's just so cool. Like I love this stuff. Science rules, you know? Okay, let's look at reincarnation. Um, let's just go right to the t-test. Paired samples, and we'll include our descriptives. Um, let's see. There was a specific reincarnation question. Reincarnation does occur. So I would imagine this would be related to this question. The soul continues to exist, though the body may die. It would be interesting to look and see if there's any relationship there, of any kind. We won't do that today, but oh, there's another witchcraft question we could have looked at. Reincarnation does occur. Okay. Okay, yeah. So there was a change from pre to post, a decent change. And according to the test, um, yeah, that's significant at P 005, or like it's less than that. So, What's our effect size? Let's add that in. Nice. Nice. Look at that. 4.65. Decent. So, how would we make sense of this? Well, it looks like belief in reincarnation went down. And it is a significant effect. And the effect size, the magnitude of the effect was pretty good. Um, this is weird though, because we didn't actually talk about reincarnation, did we? I guess we talked about some things that might be tangentially related. We talked about naturalism. We talked about dualism, the belief, the mind-body dualism. So we kind of talked about souls a little bit, but we didn't specifically talk about reincarnation. So it's actually very interesting. The belief in reincarnation went down, even though we didn't talk about it. I wonder why that would have happened. Anybody got any ideas? Yeah, cool topic. I mean, like maybe what happened here is just that because levels of belief seem to go down overall, levels of belief for specific phenomena that we didn't cover still tended to go down because overall levels of belief were just going down. Yeah, let's look at the soul continues to exist after we die, or though the body may die. So the soul continues to exist though the body may die. And then we'll get the post one. So let's see what that says. And let's get, just to keep things clear, no, actually, yeah, no, I'm gonna get rid of those. Just to keep it clear. Okay, a little bit of a change. If we look at our descriptive stats, there's a slight change, not a big one. Not a big one. Belief levels went from an average agreement rating of 5.125 to an even 5. Oh, not significant at all. And a tiny, tiny effect size, minuscule. So, that's interesting. Belief in reincarnation changed, but levels of belief in the soul and whether it exists after death did not change. That is interesting. That is very interesting. Why? Maybe because, well, so reincarnation is specific to certain religions and like sure, yeah, we talk about it in like the spiritualist and the New Age circles, but it's specific to certain religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, right? Whereas the Abrahamic religions, it's more about some kind of afterlife that the soul goes to, as opposed to being reincarnated. So I wonder if this reflects more ingrained cultural beliefs. Um, honestly, I would ask people if we're as long as we're spitballing other things we can ask people, for demographic data, I would ask them about their religious affiliation, not just culture. So I would ask them, are you a religious, are you Christian? Are you Jewish? Are you Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist? Are you an atheist? Right? And then I'd see like whether that has some effect. Yeah, this is really interesting. I would guess, again, like when you get an interesting result, you want to explain it. So here you might say there was no significant change for belief in the soul continuing to exist after death, but there was a reduction in belief for reincarnation. Why? Well, it could be because um, belief in the soul is more robust, owing to perhaps people's religious affiliations. Whereas reincarnation, I'm willing to guess. Well, actually, no, I'm not willing to guess. I would need to know who it is that's continuing to believe in reincarnation, and does that have something to do with their religion? So maybe if we have some Hindus who have completed our survey, they would say maybe, oh yeah, yeah, reincarnation, totally. I believed it before, still believe it now, right? But maybe somebody who's just kind of a spiritualist who comes from like a Christian background, maybe their belief in reincarnation goes down, but their belief in the existence of the soul following the death of the body does not change, right? That's a good question too, Will. I think I would. Like, so we'd want to know not just whether you are religious or not, or what religion you follow, but how, I guess, how you would rate your devotion to it, and how long you've been practicing. You know, some people identify as a particular religion, but they're not all that religious, right? A lot of Christians they say, I'm a Christian, you know, but maybe they only go to church on Easter or Christmas, right? And then there are those Christians who are like in church every Sunday, you know, who are like really devout, who would say like, well, those people, they're not very Christian. They only go on Easter and stuff, right? So because it's self-identification, yeah, it would be better to I think, you know, like what do you identify as and what's your sort of like, I don't know, level of commitment or how long have you been at it, right? Um, and that could be interesting to look at simply because of the overlap that we talked about earlier in the course between the supernatural and the paranormal. What's that, Zach? Uh, Yetism? Is that? I'm not sure what that is. Yeah, Holly, like introducing skepticism to people. Oh, let Yetism is a belief in something. Oh, like, oh, interesting. I've never heard that term before. Yeah, I would include that though. Totally. I might have to explain what it means. Yeah, like it's kind of like those people who say they're spiritual rather than religious. Kind of reminds me of that. Which I mean, even, you know, even I might count as spiritual, but not as this, right? I'm like spiritual in the Carl Sagan sense. You know, the soaring spiritual high that is our oneness with the cosmos. You know, that's where I get that from. But some people believe in a higher power, but like you say, it's not necessarily like the Christian God or whatever God. It's just something, right? No matter what, Holly says the contents of the course and yeah, introducing skepticism may have had an effect on one but not the other. Sorry, this is a funny smell. I think somebody's. Where's that coming from? Somebody's smoking the reefer. I hope they're not doing it inside. Why can I smell it? That's. Oh, you know what it is? I've got the window open. I bet it's those construction workers across the street. Well, it is the last class. But we do have to finish up first. No, I left my window open and there's some construction across the street where they're putting in a new little a low-rise apartment. I guess what I'm smelling is that the construction workers are done for the day. Yeah, good for them. That's fine. I got no problems. Yes, Holly, brilliant. Drug use history. Well, because altered states, right? And you know, we're coming up with so many ideas here that you know, we could conceivably do one overall study looking at changes in belief, but you could also design other studies following up from that to drill down using new samples to drill down into, you know, specific things like how does culture and religion affect your beliefs, and are those beliefs more or less robust to change, or drug use, right? There's so many things you can do. And like, I hope what I've shown you is that once you sort of get started, That's when the ideas come. If you go and do research, you want to have the whole thing planned out ahead of time. That's what I wanted when I was heading into my PhD. I had this idea in mind. Like, I was like, I'm going to do an empirical study on the uncanny valley. And what I wanted to do, I was curious whether empathy had an effect on how susceptible people are to the uncanny valley phenomenon. And so I had all these grand ideas. I was like, well, I'll take people with differences in empathy, right? I'll look at um, students, and I'll find like some people on the autism spectrum, or I'll find some psychopaths and stuff, people with differences in empathy, and I'll look at them responding to these robots, and it'll be amazing. And I've got it all figured out. And one of my early advisors, Guy Lacroix, I didn't end up working with Guy, but he did provide me with a lot of good advice. I was in his lab group for a bit. And he kind of put the brakes on, right? And he was like, whoa, 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 whoa. These are good ideas, but you're going to have to work with special populations. It's going to be a pain to get everything through ethics. Just look at the variances in empathy in the in your student population, right? So I didn't even end up looking at the uncanny valley specifically. I looked at employing what I essentially did was um, design a version of the Turing test that could be used as an experimental tool for understanding how humans think about AI, not the typical Turing test, which is as a thought experiment or an empirical experiment over whether a machine can think. I called it reflexive experimental um, Turing tests. So the project I ended up with was way different than the one I started with, but by doing all these little ideas and running little pilots and trying things here and there, that's when things really start to happen. And if you have a good supervisor, they will get you started by, maybe you won't even start with your own study. You'll start by helping someone else with their study. And then you'll come up with ideas like, oh, we could also explore this. And then you go and run your own analysis or you run your own new study. Um, for me, the magic happens once you've started the work. It's not going to be, you know, your study is not going to look like what you think it's going to look like when you start. But that's not a bad thing, I guess is the takeaway. Um, all right. Well, that was great. I had a lot of fun looking over all of those numbers with you. I'm going to go back to this view. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of offer a few remarks to wrap up. Um, if there's anything I want you to take away from this, it's not only what I've said about skepticism as investigation rather than simply doubting for the sake of doubting. That's kind of like a cynical skepticism. But true skepticism is about investigating. And we shouldn't shy away from extraordinary claims. We do need extraordinary evidence to determine whether our belief in those claims meets the standard of knowledge, right? And by knowledge, I mean like the philosophical definition. I mean a justified true belief. So, I can have beliefs and those beliefs might be true, right? I can certainly have false beliefs, like the sky is purple. Well, it's not, it's blue. My belief that the sky is blue is true. But we could also say it's knowledge because I have a justification for having that true belief, namely the evidence that my eyes provide me with when I go and look at the sky, right? That's what skepticism is about, trying to work out um, whether your beliefs meet the standard of knowledge. That's what we're trying to do here. And that's why, I think it's interesting to look at belief change. But I'm not actually trying to change your beliefs. Another thing Jones and Zisney talk about in their paper is that they talk a little bit about the ethics of changing beliefs. And they conclude that, yes, it is ethical to try and change people's beliefs because that's what university is for. We're trying to equip you with knowledge. So some of the things that you believed before that were perhaps wrong are going to change, right? Um, so I actually do agree with them. I do think that belief change, like aiming for belief change in a class like this is ethical, but it's not my goal. That's not my goal. My goal is actually knowledge change. If you want to continue believing in some of the paranormal phenomena that you believed in before the course began, that's up to you. That's fine. I just really hope that you've taken away the, what skepticism really is, and I hope that you appreciate that even if you do believe in something paranormal or supernatural, it's still a wise idea to be a skeptic. Um, Another takeaway, a lot of what we've been doing here is pretty naturalism centric, right? Where we're all about understanding, we're trying to understand the physical causes behind these anomalous experiences. And the assumption is, if you're a naturalist, that all anomalous experiences have sufficient physical causes. There's no need to posit anything paranormal or supernatural. That would be a case of causal overdetermination. Oh my goodness. Excuse me. I sneezed. Um, yeah, that would be a case of causal overdetermination. Um, that's also really why I agree with people like Jones and Zusne um when they say we're best to describe paranormal or experiences or phenomena as anomalous. Because when we do that, when we describe them as paranormal, we're saying that the explanation is it might be beyond the current scope of natural science, or it might be something non-physical. It might actually be something supernatural, right? But anomalous, when we use the word anomalous, we're really saying it's probably got a naturalistic explanation that we just haven't worked out yet. The tricky thing is balancing that um, with the axiological stuff. Um, what I mean by that is we can give natural explanations for anomalous experiences, anomalous phenomena. What do we do with that? Do we then try and tell everybody that if they're a believer in the paranormal, that everything they believe is wrong? I mean, I don't agree with the believers, but I also appreciate that people do derive value from these experiences in a very similar way to the way that people derive value to religion or from religion. We didn't do the ethics of belief lecture, but if we had, we would have looked at uh, um, William K. Clifford's um, ethics of belief, where he argues that it is always immoral to believe without evidence. And we'd have compared that to William James's will to believe, where if you have what's called a genuine option, then it's okay to believe without evidence. And a genuine option is momentous. It's live, and I forget the other one. But if these certain conditions are met, it's okay to believe. And James had something in mind like religion, right? So yeah, I remember now. It's got to be a live option. So it's like if I ask you, do you believe in God? Like yes or no. It has to be a real question for you. Um, and you have to answer it. You can't just cop out. You have to say no. You have to decide. Um, And you also it's momentous in the sense that you have it could have profound implications for your life, whether you decide to believe or not. Um, so for James, it is okay under certain circumstances to believe without evidence. So, okay. So what do I do with all that, right? That's an interesting issue that I think needs exploring. Um, because the rationalist in me, like the naturalist, wants to know how the natural world works. And I want to have the right answer. And I don't want to, I also, as a philosopher, I just don't want to have false beliefs. I want to make sure, I'm a skeptic, right? So I want to make sure that my beliefs meet the levels of knowledge. A lot of skeptics actually, whether you're looking at the ancient world or even more modern thinkers like Descartes, a lot of skeptics seems to think that very few of our beliefs or even none of our beliefs meet the standard of knowledge. And that's why skepticism has this association with doubting, right? But I want to know, I'm more like a scientific skeptic. I want to know which of my beliefs I can be sure are true and well justified. But the other side of me, the more humanist side, kind of gets like a yucky feeling when I think of like just telling everybody how wrong they are, you know? Um, um, oh, I've just remembered all of the names for William James's options. It has to be live, forced, and momentous. I knew my brain wouldn't fail me. So yeah, I would say like I actually I think I more come down on the side of William K. Clifford. I'm not sure if it's ethical to believe without evidence at the very least. William James would say if you've got the option to either believe or not believe and it's live, like it's a real choice for you, it's forced, you have to decide, and it's momentous. It would have massive implications for your life. Then it's okay to believe without evidence. I don't know. I really don't know. I guess I think it's fine for some people to do things that way, but it's not okay for me to do things that way. But there is an interesting sort of Gordian knot here where we've got our natural causal explanation, our sufficient causes for anomalous, our sufficient physical causes. So our naturalistic explanations for anomalous experience. What do we do with that together with, uh, you know, questions concerning value that people derive from these beliefs, which might be wrong? Do we say, sure, believe in wrong stuff even though it provides meaning? Or don't believe in things that are false and go without the additional meaning that these things provide in your life? I don't know, but it's an interesting question. And I think this is an approach I would like to take in an upcoming project. And that project is as follows. This class needs a textbook. I use readings from here and there, and I change it up a little bit every year. But I think this class really needs a textbook. And so I'm kind of announcing this to all of you to make it so that I have something that I need to work toward. But I am envisioning a textbook for this class, which will be entitled The Philosopher's Guide to the Anomalous. Or at least that's the working title. And what I'm going to try and do is, using a naturalistic approach, explain a lot of the anomalous phenomena that we've looked at in class, naturalistically, of course, and then try and grapple with those questions related to the ethics of belief and the value that those beliefs might add to one's life. And indeed, a big part of this is going to be explaining why certain anomalous experiences might be valuable. Not all of them are. Some might be traumatic. If you believe you've been abducted by aliens and they've probed you in all of your orifices, that might not be a very valuable experience. That might be terrifying and traumatic, and you might wish it to forget about it. Or you might wish for somebody to come along and say, "Don't worry, you weren't probed. It was just sleep paralysis," right? But I'd like to try and do this like a sort of two-pronged approach where we have a naturalistic prong and a sort of axiological prong where we look at value and ethics. And I think that that could make for a good textbook to use in this class. And I'm telling you about this so that I have now put it out there and I feel like I need to actually start working on it. But at least I've got a working title and an approach. Um, That's all I really wanted to say in terms of concluding remarks, other than thank you all. This has been fun. I love teaching this class. I'm so lucky that I get to do this. Oh, you buy that book? Oh, thanks, Will. Well, I that's the other thing. I would try and write it so it's accessible enough for a general audience, but that I could also use as a class textbook. That's the idea. And I don't want it to be too long. Because I don't have time. I don't have time to do research. I'm not going to have time to do a lot of writing. But yeah, like Holly says, now that I've told you, I have to do it. That's why I'm telling you. It's like I need to motivate myself to actually do this. So, thank you all for such a great term. This is so great. I love this class. I am like so lucky to get to do this. This is a class that I don't think you're going to find at too many other universities, right? I think the University of Edinburgh offers a class on parapsychology, which is kind of like this one. That's the only other one I'm aware of. I could be wrong. There could be other ones, but it's a real treat to get to do this. And it's a real treat to get to interact with all of you. I'm sorry that it's online and not in person. I do like the in-person stuff better, but this has been so great. And thank you all so much. You're all so kind. Thank you. Now, we've got about 15 minutes. So, does anyone have any questions about the essay? Because I did return your feedback. Even if you forgot to submit proof of work, you don't have a grade, but you have comments, so you can still get to work. And if you forgot to submit proof of work, just get me something, and I'll assign you a grade. Um, Yeah. How to get people to floss more. You know what? I have a dentist appointment this week and I just know they're going to ask me and I'm going to tell them, yeah, no, I'm still bad at it. It's remembering to do it, you know? I brush twice a day, but I'm terrible at flossing. Yeah, psychology is so mundane. I'm not knocking it, but like a lot of psychologists just go and work in marketing and stuff. Like, how do we get people to buy this product, right? Or UX research. A lot of cog sci people go into UX research, which is a lot of they call it A/B testing, but it's basically what we did today. It's doing T tests and stuff. Um, oh, thanks, Belle. That's awesome. That's great to hear. I'm so glad you all enjoyed it. That's very nice. Yeah, and Holly, yeah, if you want to email me that study, maybe it will motivate me to floss more. I'd welcome a new bit of reading. But are there any questions on the essay? So you all have your feedback. Um, uh, I guess what I want to reiterate is it's the same thing I said in one of my recent announcements. That is that I'm going to try and keep an open door policy. I mean, open door because I'm not actually going to be physically in my office, but I'll be on the Discord server. I'll be checking my email. So if you have any questions, um, reach out. If you have questions about your feedback, talk to your TA first, unless I marked your stuff, then talk to me. Um, we don't do mark grubbing, right? Like, don't be like, I deserved a higher mark. Well, that's for me to determine. That's why I'm the professor, right? So I don't like mark grubbing. If I take a look at something and I do feel it was evaluated incorrectly, I will offer you to change the mark, but there's no guarantee that that's what I'm going to do, right? But if you have questions how to turn your proposal into your essay, I'm absolutely here to help you. And we can talk on the server, we can talk over email, we can set up Zoom meetings, whatever you need to do. But maybe since it's the last class, and nobody have any questions. Oh, can we go over the word count? Yeah, you can. The rule of thumb, if you're in my class, is that generally it's okay to go over the word count, but it is never okay to go under the word count. There's a little asterisk there though, and that is, if you go over the word count, you want to make sure you're not repeating yourself unnecessarily, right? A little bit of repetition is okay. If you're dividing your essay into sections, then maybe when you finish one section and you start the next one, you want to say, okay, so in the last section we did this. Now we're going to move on and do this, just to kind of keep the reader oriented where they are. But you don't want to be like saying the same thing in one paragraph that you just said in a previous paragraph. So you can go over the word limit without unnecessary repetition. Just make sure that everything that's in that paper is doing something to convince the reader of your thesis or of your answer to your research question. Remember, each paragraph is a step toward your conclusion. You don't want to repeat steps, but you might need to remind the reader which step they're on, if that makes sense. Any other questions? Some of you might be wondering, excuse me, about the grades for the second reflection assignment. I haven't started marking those yet, but we will, and you'll have those returned to you at some point through the exam period. And then, of course, the essays are due on the last day of the exam period, and we have 10 days to finish the marking and get the grade submitted. So you'll get your grade back for the essay on Brightspace within 10 days from the due date. And then after that, once the final grades have been submitted, you'll be able to see your final grade in the course on Carleton Central. Um, that's all I can think of. Any other questions before we wrap up? On the proposal? Well, I'll just tell you right now, nobody gets 100. Nobody's perfect. So no one gets 100. Um, but you can get like mid to high 90s if you really impress me. Because it's not like you're writing a test where if you get all of the answers correct, you get 100. It's just not that kind of thing, right? Um, but yeah, you can still get a high mark. And yeah, generally if you're getting a 90 or above, you've impressed me. Yeah. That's not to say if you have a mark in the 80s or the 70s that your work isn't good, right? Remember, like the 70s range is a B, and that's good. In the 80s, that's like A minus and A. That's excellent, right? Um, so if you get a B or an A, like that's definitely not bad. That's not bad at all. Um, I think some people get a little discouraged sometimes in a philosophy class. They think, "Oh, I got an A minus. That's terrible." Because I got an A plus in my computer science course, right? Well, yeah, but that's because it's a different method of evaluation, you know. Um, I mean, honestly, I'd only worry if you're getting into the C range. That's when I would start to worry, right? Um, but nobody gets 100 on my essays. It's because I don't think the perfect essay exists. because writing an essay isn't like completing a math equation. It's a different kind of thing. Well, anything else? Of course, if you do have questions, like I said, email me. Um, if you have like a general question that you think lots of people would like to hear the answer to, you can put it on the Discord server. But for official business, remember that it should come from your Carlton email and go to my Carlton email. Yeah. So for like really important stuff, make sure you use the proper channels. And if anyone needs, we sit down for a Zoom meeting. Well, that's all. I don't have much else to say except to once again thank all of you for such a fun course. I'm really glad that you enjoyed it. I always enjoy it, and I'm glad you enjoy it. I know I was saying participation for the live lectures was a little low, and that is disappointing. I mean, not all of you who are here, you participate. I just wish more people were here. Then again, like I do understand it's the summer. A lot of you have jobs, a lot of you are taking other classes, so I get it. Uh, I still had fun. I still had a great time. I hope you all learned something and that you had a great time too. Um, and maybe I'll see some of you in future classes. Is anyone taking philosophy of mind in the late summer? Very good. Oh, super. Well, Holly and Leo, I'll see you there. Tristan, yes. So do a registration override request with the registrar's office or with the department. Talk to our departmental admin. I think Lauren is on vacation, but Lucia, you'll want to email Lucia because people do drop it. And you could keep caught up and then like because I put everything on YouTube and then if a spot opens up then you can get in. So that would be my advice if you want to take that course. It's a fun course for me to teach, but I'm going to warn you, the textbook is very technical. So we're going to use Jagwon Kim's textbook, Philosophy of Mind. It is very technical. I would say it's not necessarily as fun as some of the readings we've done here, but it is an excellent book. And, that's my job, right? To make the very technical, dry stuff more accessible and fun for all of you. So, yeah, Tristan, think about a registration override request to see if you could possibly enroll that way in case a spot opens up. And for Holly and Leo and whoever else, I'll see you there. And all of you, I'll see you around, maybe in a different class in the future. Sometimes I just run into students and I don't recognize them, and they're like, "Hey, Professor Redstone," and I'm like, "Hey, uh, what class are you from again?" So, say hi if you want. Take another class with me or any of the other excellent philosophy professors we have here at Carleton. Take care of yourselves. Have a good rest of your summer. Um, yeah, happy trails and farewell, everyone. This was a blast. So bye for now.